Hi there, I'm Trish Gunby. I'm a state rep in the 99th District, which includes Manchester, Valley Park, Twin Oaks, and unincorporated St. Louis County. I was elected in a special election last fall to finish out a term, and now I'm running again and plan to get reelected on November 3rd. So thanks for the opportunity to answer some questions today.
No problem. My name's Josh Anthony. I'm with the Objective Report, and I'm going to be interviewing Trish Gunby right now. Okay, so let's start with the first question. We all know about the elephant in the room, which is the coronavirus, COVID-19. And I don't know if you knew this, but on July 9th, which was this past Thursday, St. Louis City actually reached a new single-day record with 795 new coronavirus cases in one day. Now, how well do you think the leaders of Missouri and specifically St. Louis City and County have handled the pandemic so far?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think it's always easy in hindsight to comment on what's been done or hasn't been done. So what I'm going to do now is comment some on what hasn't been done, but understanding that this is unlike anything we've really ever faced. I believe that because it hit Missouri, the middle of the United States, after it started on both coasts and larger metropolitan areas around and as well as around the world. I think a lot of what we should do is look at how those communities have handled it and what some of the outcomes have been. We have that in our favor because it didn't necessarily hit us first. With that being said, I believe that our city and our county have done a fairly good job working together around this. I know that there are some communities that have been significantly affected, particularly communities, Black communities, persons of color. There are many reasons around that. Healthcare, the fact that many of them are first responders or considered essential workers. So they tend to be on the front lines and are in, they can't quarantine at home. So there are a number of reasons why those communities are affected. I think that the leadership in the county and the city have tried to work together. Obviously, we have mask mandates in place now, unlike other parts of the state. I am disappointed in our governor. I feel like there are cities around the state that are following our lead and what other larger cities have done. Columbia instituted a mask mandate. Springfield just had a vote and just instituted one. So it should be no surprise that that's a good way to help combat this virus. And I don't believe it's an assault on people's liberty. People buckle up with seatbelts. There's some areas you can't go in with no t-shirt or shoes on to get service. And those things may or may not affect other people, but this is something that affects people. And the thing about it is, you may not know you have it, unlike other diseases where you know you have it. So the fact that it can be carried, having masks would just be a way to ensure a safer community for all of us.
Okay. Now, St. Louis has kind of started to reopen a little bit, but how would you have handled the reopening of St. Louis amid the pandemic?
I don't know that I probably would have changed much. I think, early on when we were all told to isolate, I think people did a pretty good job with that, staying at home, only going out for essential reasons to get food or those kinds of things. You have to start reopening at some point. And so we've asked people to wear masks. We've asked them to not be in groups larger than a certain number. I think people just need to be very mindful of doing things indoors and in large groups and without masks on. And if those communities, for instance, bars, I know your generation, those a little bit older than you, that's a challenge. I've got children in their 20s, and I understand the challenge around that. But those communities are affected as well, and then they may bring it back home to parents and siblings and grandparents that everybody's living or being around each other. So I don't know that I really would change anything. I think we just need to be very mindful of what's happening in other states as they have really reopened and are now having to go back and close. I just posted something about New Zealand where they have no cases there.
Mhm.
And the idea was they sat tight, everybody, for a certain amount of time, and they don't have the virus anymore. So we just have to be more patient. I think Americans tend to be, and one reason our country is the way it is, it's about the individual and individual rights and that sort of thing, which I totally understand. But there are some things, and this is an example, where I think you have to think about the community at large. And you may have to do some things that you personally don't want to do, but it's better for the community. So I don't know that I would change that much. I think I would just be careful opening up too quickly because we don't want to be a Texas or a Florida or a Georgia or a California or an Arizona. How many more states are there? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've talked a little bit about coronavirus, which is a huge current day problem, we've seen recently that the Black Lives Matter movement has been very vocal when it comes to police reform. And do you think that any changes need to be made to the law enforcement system?
I do. I think anytime a community, a society asks for something to be studied, elected leaders have to listen to that. And I don't think we can dispute the fact that not only our city, our state, but the whole world has asked for that institution to be studied. I am not a proponent of getting rid of the police department. Um, but like any institution, there are times where you need to go back and reflect on your policies, whether you have them or don't have them, and how can they be improved? How can they be made better for every member of society? So I think that um, every police department, every county, city, government, the public should be asking for a review of their police forces, and we have to figure out ways to make them better and ways that certain members of the population do not feel like that they are being oppressed by that group. And so we have video of things that have happened, and there's video of things that have happened that we can only imagine had that been available. So yes, I'm in favor of whatever those changes are. I don't know, but we definitely need to come together and decide what the police force in the next few years, the next decade looks like.
Okay. There's also been a lot of controversy lately surrounding the mayor of St. Louis City, Crewson, who recently read the names and addresses of citizens that wanted to defund the police in an online press conference. Now, what is your opinion regarding this situation?
I don't know. I'm aware of the situation. I don't know what was behind the rationale of doing that. I have constituents or folks who email me or call me all the time. I consider those conversations privileged. Obviously, people can do a sunshine request and find out who's emailing me about stuff, but um, to me, that is something that's something between me and a constituent, and I'm not in a position to share that with others.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know her rationale behind that, but that's why that was done, and I don't see that I would have the need
Right.
to do that.
Now, a related event was regarding the McCluskey family, who recently pointed guns at people who were protesting the mayor in their private neighborhood. Now, St. Louis City seized their rifles as part of a search warrant, but the McCluskey's attorney claims the family is innocent and that they did not break any laws. What do you think should happen in this situation?
I'm not a legal scholar or an
Yeah.
attorney. What I've read about that is, and I read accounts of people who were actually in the group that marched on that neighborhood. And according to the account of the person who I know, they went that way. Almost it was a cut through to get to Mayor Crewson's house. It was not intentional to march on that street. It was just seen as a cut through. And in that moment, these homeowners decided to come out and, in their words, I guess, defend their property. My guess is if they had just stayed in their house, people just would have marched to Mayor Crewson's house. So, and I understand things I've read say that to point a weapon at somebody for no reason, that's against the law. You can't really do that. So I'm going to defer to the judicial system to handle that. I don't believe that started out, that interchange, that exchange that happened. I believe if that family had just stayed in their homes, we wouldn't be talking about it. And, people wouldn't even know their names at this point. So.
Mm-hmm. Kind of segueing into that is the issue of gun reform. Now, you have been a vocal supporter of common sense gun reform, but how do you think common sense gun reform policies could be implemented in the St. Louis area?
Yes, I'm a common sense gun candidate from Moms Demand Action, and I just want to be clear: I'm not against the Second Amendment. I'm for reducing gun violence. So ways that one can do that, I'm in favor of universal background checks. I don't believe we should arm domestic abusers. I don't believe in legislation the last few years that has been attempted to be passed in the state legislature in terms of guns everywhere, where you could bring guns into churches and schools and universities and, well, everywhere. And so those kinds of things I am not in favor of. I think that if we were able to address the things I just mentioned, that would be helpful. I do believe that there is a sense of hopelessness and despair, and some folks feel like they need a weapon to protect themselves and their family. And so until we get to some of the root causes of why that is, these kind of things will continue to happen. I know there's a group in the city that tries to go in and de-escalate issues before they get to, before people may go out and use a weapon. And so those kinds of social service attempts, I think we need to kind of fund those things. If we look at police reform, how can we take funds and assist the police so that there's so much involving social service needs when they go out on calls. And so how can we use funding to assist the police in what they're supposed to do, but also have a social service part of that assists the police in their efforts. They shouldn't be having to do all those things, but we have to have funding to remedy those issues.
Right. Now, as you may know, one of our main missions at the Ejector Reporter is to inform our generation of voters. But in the last election cycle, it was actually reported that less than half of people aged 18 to 29 actually voted. Now, on the other hand, for people aged 45 and up, voter turnout was above 66%. What policy ideas do you have that could increase voter turnout, especially for younger generations?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, and I've said this before in some things, when I was your age, all I cared about was like building a homecoming float. That was it. Who are we going to play in the football game, and what's our float look like? So the fact that you all are having any of these conversations, you are so far advanced in terms of what my generation was doing at your age. So shout out to all of you for doing this. So you have the building blocks, but if you're going to do all this work, the way you cross the finish line is to vote. To go out and to assemble and to march and to tweet and to TikTok and to Instagram and do all those things. If you don't take it a step further and actually vote in legislators or vote for ballot issues that you believe in, then what you've been doing is just wasted. So I would just encourage people to realize that a lot of this change, it takes time. I think there's a sense we all get impatient. We want to just go out and vote, and if it doesn't go our way, we're done with it. It doesn't work. But I can tell you that what the time we are living in right now, and the state of divisiveness of government, that is something that was intentionally started when President Obama was first elected in 2008. So we're 12 years in. It took us 12 years to get to where we are right now. And by that I mean there was attempts and successful attempts made to flip legislatures, and it was done with negative mailers. It became very divisive. People became polarized. And so rather than working across the aisle and working on legislation that would benefit the vast majority versus people on opposite sides, that's taken 12 years to get where we are. And so if you're not happy with the way things are, it's not going to be remedied in one election cycle. But I can tell you that if you are unhappy, little by little, you can reclaim the government that you want, that you feel is most representative of you. And that means registering to vote. That means going out to vote. That means texting your friends and telling them to vote. It is a very active enterprise. It requires homework. You cannot believe everything you read or everything you see on social media. I had a number of negative mailers on me. Actually, I had 5. $200,000 was spent in my special election on negative mailers that were untrue. And I had to talk about that. I only did positive mailers, all issues oriented, but there came a point where I had to address that. And I had people calling me or emailing me and saying, what do you believe? Did you say this? And so that's what it's going to take, is people are going to have to take an active role in government. If you don't run and you wonder about something, contact the person running and just ask them. And I had a call last week about something from the last election, somebody asking me my position on something. So those things linger, but what I think your generation just has to recognize is you are much further along than my whole generation was. And that's going to bode well for you down the road. It's going to probably require people to do things sooner rather than later. Because I don't know that my generation was voting, 66% when they were in their 20s. Probably not. So I'm very hopeful. And I love being around people who have that passion. And I know the world's going to be in great hands because I feel like you're much further along than we were. So just get out there and vote. And August 4th, Medicaid expansion, vote yes. And then obviously November 3rd, vote again.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to say to your voter base out there before we wrap up?
I would just like to say that, in this time of the virus and being at home and sequestered and all of that, I know the tedium and there's anxiety, and all of that is very real. This is going to get better. It's just going to take some time. And I would encourage people to find something they're passionate about, whether it be a cause or a candidate. And if that's something you believe in, invest your time and your energy and your money, because it costs a lot of money to run these campaigns. Invest in that, because when you do that, you feel like you're a part of the process. I represent 37,000 residents in the 99th district, and I am mindful of that every time I vote. Anything I do, when I reach out to the governor, whatever it is, I think about how people feel about those things. And while I represent them, and you have your own representatives, that doesn't mean as a citizen, you can't be just as effective as I am. Calling, writing, social media, all those things. Be an engaged citizen. You do not have to run for office. I was much louder when I wasn't elected than I am now because I have to sort of behave myself. But you have some latitude when you're a citizen, unless you decide to run for office and then people Google your name and see the things you said and did. But you have more latitude than a lot of elected officials. So find a cause, find a candidate, get engaged, and be a voice for whatever it is you believe in.